that I see a lot in the press, fragility, the problems of natural disasters such as Japan, such as the volcano in Europe that kept the planes from flying and delivering things, the political instability that we see over in the Middle East. You know, all those things disruptive. We've all read about Ford can't make tuxedo black cars now because they can't get a certain pigment or some material out of some factory in Japan. So significant impact on the supply chain. Lots of decisions about deciding to bring work closer to the place where it's produced because of those problems. In China and in the other low labor cost countries, significant wage increases. Chinese wages have been going up about 20% a year, and currencies rising about 6% a year for China, and poised to rise substantially. One of the reasons the way the currencies are going up is those countries are seeing significant inflation, higher inflation rates than we have. And the best way for them to control inflation, in other words, to control prices in their own currencies, is to let their currencies rise, which reduces the cost of wheat, the cost of copper, the cost of oil coming in, expressed in their currencies, which is what their workers care about. As their currencies rise, that raises their costs expressed in dollars, and therefore will tend to drive work out of their countries and back to our country. The US dollar declining in general has been hitting new lows almost every day for the last 3 or 4 months. It's at the lowest level now in, I don't know, 3 years, 6 years, something like that. And oil prices have been soaring. I think they're back up to, you know, $120, $100 a barrel, which drives up the price of freight, both surface freight and air freight coming in. So all these factors are tending to cause disruption in the supply chain, tending to cause companies to rethink their supply chain. And the solution to every one of these is, a good solution is bring it back here. So and already the companies, as I said before, are often making the wrong decision. They're making decisions on partial information. So a study that was done by Archstone Consulting, which was a consulting group in Chicago, concluded that about 60%, so the majority of manufacturers, used only rudimentary or simple cost analysis when they tried to decide what it was really costing them when they offshored. So they miss 20, 30 or more % of the total cost of things like the travel cost to go check on the supplier, the carrying cost on the inventory while it was coming over, the extra inventory they had to keep on the shelf, the intellectual property risk, the opportunity cost where they couldn't deliver because the supply chain was too long and they couldn't react quickly enough. So a whole range of these costs that they missed that disappeared into the P&L, like overhead cost, or somewhere in the balance sheet, or like opportunity cost. The orders you don't get don't appear anywhere in the financial statement. You know, there's no number that says we've lost 5 orders, but the sales are lower and the earnings are lower, and the jobs are fewer. So because of that, so here's a survey, very rudimentary, you know, very not a large enough sample at all, but just to give you a feeling. I did this at an ISM, the Institute of Supply Management, probably the biggest of the supply chain groups, chapter meeting in Connecticut. And I asked the companies, which of these factors did you include in your decision process? So you can see that for all these factors, less than 40% of them included important things like, you know, emergency air freight, opportunity cost, intellectual property risk, travel cost, green, you know, all these things that they say they're green, but in reality they aren't actually allocating anything to it. So I developed the total cost of ownership estimator. This is the software that you're going to get, and Mohammed or Rand or someone can tell me when I'm done how you're going to get it. You can certainly pick it all up on the Reshoring Initiative website, but I think we may have another way for that. The estimator is flexible. The values are 100% user selected. So you put in the values. You put in how much you travel, how many times you're going to go visit the customer, how many weeks you're going to go, what the cost is. You put in your carrying cost rate, like 22%, 25% a year. So I provide the formulas or the structure. You put all the data in. So since it's your objective data going in, it will be your objective data coming out. Flexibility. It's broad. It considers 29 cost factors. I just added this last weekend to get ready for you. I had to learn how to do this. There's a pull-down menu now where you, instead of just having everything for China, you can select any of 17 countries. And by your selecting that country, I then learned how to use VLOOKUP in Excel. And it was very exciting, and I managed to do it. And then that pulls the surface freight rates and the air freight rates out and populates the spreadsheet. So whatever country you pick up, it uses the right freight rates to do the calculation. And then it also, you have a choice of parts, like we see out here a lot of parts. We also see mold makers and die makers. So you have a choice of parts or tools and in a menu. And depending on which one you pick, it populates with the correct duty rate for that category of product. Okay, so it's gotten a lot more flexible. It calculates the present value of the total cost of ownership for the U.S. and the other country, and then it also forecasts that going out into the future based on your assumptions about the wage rate increases in each of the countries and the change in currencies. And it's easy to use. There's explanations and references, things all throughout it to help you do it easily. And then there's an instruction manual that's available if you need to go to that for more help. And even better, it's free. Okay? Like when you talk to each other out here at the show, free is always a good price. Okay? Although for somebody. Here's the kinds of costs that are included: FOB price, packaging, duty, freight, inventory, rework, quality, product liability, all these kind of things. Here's a typical example. Starts out with this is a hypothetical example. Starts with the Chinese unit price of 70, U.S. price of 100, 12,000 units a year. So not hard kind of numbers up here at the top. The weight, number of shipments per year, again, hard numbers. And over here are softer things like the product liability risk. So as an example of product liability, I read an article in the Financial Times in 2009. The headline of the article was, "Made in China, sued in the U.S." So it turned out that a component was made in China. A U.S. product manufacturer bought the component, assembled it into the product. Product was sold, product failed. The plaintiff sued. The U.S. product manufacturer had to bear the entire legal burden, the entire payment, because the manufacturer of the defective component wasn't reachable by the legal system. Now, in contrast, anybody who stays in business in the U.S. knows they have to carry product liability insurance, and if you've been the component manufacturer and that had happened, your insurance would have covered that, some portion of that liability, and therefore the product company, the bigger company, wouldn't have had to bear the whole thing. In principle, that company should be willing to pay you a little bit more because of that insurance protection that you provide that it doesn't get from your competitor, for example, in the country like China. So these are all the kind of things that go into it. But here's what the output. Here's the first form of output. Here's that $70 Chinese price. Here's the $100 U.S. price. And the supply chain manager, any of you supply chain people who raise their hands, you tend to look at that and say, $30 saving, 30%, 2,000 units, that's $60,000 a year price saving. That's whatever percent of my annual objective. It's well along towards my bonus. I should do that. But when you look and see the total cost of ownership, say 97 for China and 108 for the U.S. So that cost gap, the price gap of 30 is close to an $11 cost gap. Now it's not so clear anymore that that's a good decision. And when the wage inflation and the currency appreciation are put in for the two countries, and you see that in 3 years, the total cost of ownership in China equals the total cost from the U.S., then hopefully you would say, I better not send any more overseas, I better start bringing some of what's over there back. Though some might say, instead of China, it should go to Vietnam or Cambodia or somewhere else, and maybe it will, but those countries don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the training, they don't have, in some ways I think, don't have the discipline, they don't have the miracle, the Chinese miracle. So a lot of companies from the U.S. wanted to somehow get involved in China because that's where the growth is, that's where that miracle is happening. And that isn't true for Vietnam, Cambodia, and all those other countries. So some of that extra incentive to go to China won't be present when China isn't so attractive, and therefore the work will be more likely to come back here. So hopefully this analysis will help convince you and other companies to make a change. Here's a second form of output, and this is the cumulative cost for China, cumulative cost for the United States, and starting with the price, and with hard numbers over here at the left, and more subjective, judgmental numbers over here at the right. So here's the price, 7,800. Here's cost of goods sold. Many of you would probably calculate that as price, duty, freight, maybe packaging. You know, some people would include all that. In some cases, if a container or 20 different parts come over, you wouldn't even include the duty and the freight because it's too complicated to get it out of the computer and add it together. But some would do that. These might be other hard costs over here would include the travel costs, the carrying costs, things that are calculable, things that are real money kind of costs, and you know are going to happen every time. And so the purpose is for the company, the supply chain, the president to see that most of this $30 gap gets closed based on hard, real numbers before you get out here to the risk factors like political instability risk or natural disaster risk or intellectual property risk, because those are judgments. Everybody can make a different judgment on those. Or the strategic impacts on innovation, or the impact of green, of carbon footprint, you know, how much should you charge for a ton of CO2? It should be doing it all. That's a judgment. Okay. So the idea is to let the company see that the savings by bringing it back are mainly over here in hard, tangible numbers. So is total cost of ownership important? Here's a survey that Capgemini did in the fall of 2010. They surveyed, it's called their Chief Purchasing Officer Survey, and they asked people what's important. And here number 2 was focus on total cost of ownership, 74% of them, in comparison to 45% on reducing costs. You know, I always thought supply chain people mainly did reducing costs. So this tells me that they're quite focused on total cost of ownership. My experience and other surveys say they're not yet consistently doing it, which means those of you who are in supply chain should be interested in what we present, and those of you who are salesmen should find at least a need in the place of your customers, you know, whether they're willing to listen, that's up to you, that's your salesman, so it's your job to convince them. Here's, how many of your companies are lean? Lean companies? You all know what lean is, more or less, okay? So Deming, who was the guru of lean, said, end the practice of awarding business on the basis of price, instead minimize total cost. Now, since he's really famous, he can get away in 2 sentences what I'm going to take, you know, an hour to talk to you about. Okay? But he captures the whole principle there. And if you look at some of the details of what lean would suggest, what most companies do with lean is try to eliminate waste. Because waste is anything that does not bring value to the customer. Any cost, any effort, anything does not bring value to the customer. So AME, for example, here, their whole what they bring to many of their customers and many of their members is, you know, success along the lean journey. So that's their focus. And so if you look at one of these categories, inventory, to see what offshoring contributes to waste, if you have in-transit inventory that's coming from China, and typically, not always, but typically the Chinese get paid before they ship, whereas the U.S. company is paid 60 to 90 days after it ships. So you've got say a 4-week in-transit inventory that's going to be present with offshoring that isn't with the U.S. And maybe in transit here could be a day or 2 days. The cycle inventory, you get a big block of inventory that comes in. Let's say this is 0. You get a big block of inventory that comes in a container once a month. So the average cycle inventory is half that. It goes up, comes down, comes up. Whereas if the local shop's delivering just in time, and it comes in every 2 or 3 days, the average inventory is somewhere down here. The safety stock is to achieve a given customer response level is proportional to the square root of the lead time. So if the lead time from Asia is 9 weeks, and from here it's 1 week, square root of 9 is 3. You have to have 3 times as much inventory to achieve the same customer service level. So, and a bunch of other factors. So you put all that together. One of the local companies I've worked with, McMurray Corp in Woodridge, they had a quality problem on a component that was coming out of Asia. They resourced it within 50 miles of Woodridge, and their inventory on that product came down by a factor of 18. Now, will that always happen? I don't know. But 18 is something, if you can get your inventory down by a factor of 18 by reshoring, how much more would you be willing to pay at the price line to achieve that on the balance sheet? A second factor that Lee looks at is instability. And here's some of the factors that cause instability. And we've heard a lot about, obviously, natural disasters, the political instability. Another instability is containers falling off of boats. I read an article a couple of weeks ago where there's thousands of containers that have fallen off of these container ships, and there's like a line of them all the way across the Pacific from Asia to here. So if your factory is sitting there waiting for the product, and when it comes in, you're down to almost no inventory, and then it falls off the boat, that's destabilizing. That's a problem. And then you're air freighting, you're doing other things to try and react. And in terms of pirates, twice I've had groups of supply chain managers that I've addressed, and I asked at first satirically, had any of them lost product to pirates, meaning machine gun pirates. So not intellectual property pirates, but machine gun. And each time, at least one company in the group raised their hands and said they actually had their container ship taken by pirates and either lost the product forever or had months of delay during negotiations. Another consideration is product strategy. So offshoring tends to drive a company towards commoditization. Why does that happen? Because offshoring means bigger batch sizes and greater distance, longer delivery. So if the customer comes in and says, "Can I have that in green?" That's awful hard. Can I have it? Can I have an inch long? No, we can't do that. Not in the time. Can I have 4 times as many next week as normal? No, we can't respond that quickly. Whereas if you have a local source that you can work with on the engineering, you can do the design, you can get a prototype quickly, you can get them to ramp up the production and get it here as soon as it's done, you've got a chance to respond. So, and the worst thing that an American company should want is to be driven towards commoditization. Commoditization means you sell mainly on the basis of price rather than on service or features or delivery or something else. And if you're driven towards commoditization, if that product assembler is driven to that end, if it's offshore, it may have lower component prices, but its assembly labor is still done here in the United States. Most of its costs are still here in the United States. And so it can't react quickly, it isn't nimble, and yet it still has overall costs that are higher than, say, a competitor from Asia that has both the component sourcing and the assembly done. So it can't afford to go towards commoditization. Now, as an example of this, I chaired a conference right near here about 6 months ago, and we had a senior manager from New Balance. Anybody wear New Balance sneakers, running shoes, and so on? Okay. And they keep one of their factories here in the U.S. because they customize the running shoes. So if I sent them the logo from the initiative today, in 3 days I could have a sneaker back with the model I selected, the size I selected, with the logo on it. And that would be impossible from Vietnam or Cambodia, wherever most of the people make their sneakers. So the ability, and keep back, the margins on those customized sneakers are twice as high as the margins on sneakers sold through retail. So there's an incentive to customize, to differentiate, to react, sort of quantity one for your customers. So those of you, again, who are salesmen, that was more than the majority. When you're selling using total cost of ownership, focus on the profit impact on the customer, the risk management, the strategic benefits. Sometimes you'll have to overcome mandates. I've been to customers and they say, sorry, the rule from the president is 1/3 of this product line will be offshore. It doesn't matter what your price is, even if you match the Chinese pricing to it. We've been told we have to go. So that's a problem. So you have to help the supply chain manager. You have to help that person develop the data to show that it's actually costing the company money, so he or she can push upward in their chain of command and change the thinking. That's hard, but that's life. Yet I find in my conversations that many of those supply chain managers, they believe they would rather source here. They say, do you think I like getting up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, calling somebody else who doesn't speak very good English, and working out the quality problems and the delivery problems? That's no fun. I'd rather be asleep. Right? Do you think I want my society, the economy of my country to gradually decline so my kids don't have jobs and my grandchildren? No, I want it to be here. You know, at the moment I'm doing what I'm told to do. My bonus is tied to it. So I've got to help them get their bonus keyed to total cost of ownership rather than to price. Work with your natural allies. I pointed out lean, so a lot of the companies have lean champions, black belts, etc. So they're a natural ally because they know that offshoring is hurting what they're trying to achieve. Green. Most of the companies, big companies, announce that they have green programs. There's a green champion in there somewhere, probably reports to a president or the president, and that person will clearly understand that there's a smaller carbon footprint associated with domestic sourcing. There's compliance people, FDA, military, some kind of compliance, and when they're sourcing, there's a couple of levels over there in China, they don't know what the material is that the bolt's being made out of and all the problems that are coming up through the supply chain. Their job is made more difficult. The quality manager knows the quality difference. The line management, say I'm the president of that division, and the supply chain people are offshoring to save price, and I'm suffering because my inventory's too big, because I'm losing orders, because of quality, because of et cetera, while the supply chain manager's getting the bonus. So all these people are natural allies for you that you can work with. If I were selling and I came to meet Dimitri, okay, and I said, Dimitri, I'd like to make that for you, and he might say, well, you have to match the Chinese price. And I say, do you mean the Chinese price, or do you mean your total cost of ownership in China? Which is it? And he says, what's this total cost of ownership? He said, I've got this software, it seems pretty objective, a lot of companies are starting to use it. How about if we fill it out together and see what you're asking me to do? See if it's an impossible gap that I have to close, or maybe you're actually asking me to raise the price. Okay? And so if I come in once and I ask him, maybe he's going to say no, and Rick might come in and he might say no. But when Mike comes in, Mike's his good friend and they play golf together, and he says, okay, the third guy this month asked me, I'll do it. So with all of you who are salesmen, work on all these people out here who are supply chain, and just keep asking, suggesting. Eventually more of them will use the tools. We've gotten a lot of support from Washington. I was down there in January. I met with the Council on Competitiveness, very high level, the chairman of GEAR, et cetera, on the board, and they're working on reshoring. I did a seminar, a webinar for the AFL-CIO to train their people around the country how their local unions can engage management in discussions about, hey boss, you know that work we were thinking of offshoring, could we go through this total cost of ownership and figure out if it really makes sense for the country, for the company or not. I went to NIST, MEP, and the IMEC here. Who's here from IMEC? Okay, so you've got some IMEC people here, which is the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. They helped organize this today, and I did a webinar for them, and I'm presenting May 17th at their annual conference. This is part of the Commerce Department, and Congressman Wolf of Virginia has introduced H.R. 516, which calls for the use of total cost of ownership, which he got from one of my articles, to bring jobs back to America. So we're getting, increasingly interest and support from the government. How many of you have read that we're supposed to be an innovation country? Innovation like Apple and so on. So that's a lot of politicians, a lot of economists will say that now we can't make knives and spoons and pots and pans anymore. We've got to innovate. And yet here's two noted professors at Harvard who say that you can't have successful innovation if you lose manufacturing. So when you separate, if you create a gap between where your manufacturing is and where your engineering and marketing are located, when they can't communicate, when they can't get to the floor and talk to the tool and die guy and talk to the foreman and say, how are we actually going to make this? Here's a new design. Can we make it? What do we have to change, etc. When you separate that by half the world, by time zones, by language, the innovation starts to fall off. So you can't have innovation isolated from manufacturing. the U.S. is starting to understand that. Another interesting article that came out just in March of 2011, a fellow David Atour, he's at MIT, and he's on the National Bureau of Economic Research, so he's a pretty smart guy. And he said that he questioned the overall benefit of globalization. Now, everybody has defended globalization by saying that every country does what it's most efficient at, and therefore everybody benefits. And his calculations, paper full of integrals and differentials and really hairy kind of stuff. But his conclusion was that the total cost to our society for the unemployment benefits and other benefits for the people that are impacted by the offshoring is about as high as the benefits that we all get at Walmart by being able to buy the cheap things that come in. So his conclusion, no net gain for society from the offshoring, and in addition you still have the unemployment and everything else from a personal, the sort of non-societal, the losers are still losers even though the rest of us have slightly benefited. So I think very important conclusion that calls into question the sort of the philosophical or economic basis of the whole process. So one of the things that the initiative is also doing is determining the price elasticity or price sensitivity of the offshore and reshoring decision. So here's, again, a very, very preliminary sample, and it says for a percentage increase in the US dollar cost coming back from China, India, wherever it's coming back from, what percentage of the work would the company actually reshore? So it says, again, very limited sample. Maybe if the dollar increase was 30%, maybe 30% of it would come back. Something on that order, which is a very big challenge, because that would take maybe a 60 or 70% increase in, for example, the Chinese yuan. So it gives an order, an idea of what has to happen. But when I get this survey more firmly established, 1,000 responses, whatever, then I'll be able to go to President Obama, go to Congress, go to the Commerce Department, and say, how many jobs do you actually want back? Well, it looks like to get that objective, you have to get the Chinese to raise their currency by X%, or you have to put on tariffs of 5%, or you have to reduce U.S. taxes by so much, or you have to train, so many more really skilled manufacturing engineers and tool design makers so we can improve our productivity by so much. But at least it'll quantify the decisions. Right now, you got a lot of people talking like this, but they don't really know what they're talking about because they don't know what the shape of the curve is and what the impacts will be. Another thing we're doing is I'm putting together a group of volunteers that will say, if this is the Chinese price here and this is the U.S. price, the total cost of ownership gets this up here, and then what do you, the shops, have to do to get your price down to here while still maintaining your profitability? So I'm putting together a team of experts in lean theory of constraints, design for manufacturability, assembly, et cetera, and then take a typical shop and all of them go at it and see what they can do and say, for each case, for each of those methodologies, here's how long it would take, about how much it would cost, and about how much they think they can do, and then take away all the overlaps and say, take the best out of each and say, what could an average shop actually do to get that price down while still maintaining profitability to actually get it to the Chinese total cost. Here's a list. Anybody who wants it, I can get it to you. So all the presentations that I'm making in the second quarter. For reference, there's now a Reshore America radio program on Kansas City 1510, if anybody wants to listen once a week. We're here today. Supply chain conference put on by IMEC next week downtown. I'm speaking to the Midwest Automotive Media Association, 20 editors who write about the automotive industry, to try to push back through them to the automotive companies. The MEP annual conference in Orlando. This is the International Forum on DFMA, Design for Manufacturability and Assembly. And coming up in the rest of the year, IUE, that's the International Union of Electrical Workers, going to be training their people. We're having a purchasing fair here in Chicago to bring together, sort of more or less like the event we have today, just really very much like we have today. Lean Accounting Summit, the Northeast Shingo Conference, that's again a very senior lean kind of group. So lots of events coming up, lots of interest from industry, and you can get this from me if you want. If you want to send more people out, you can come to these events. So here's the Illinois reshoring issue. I told you about we're doing something specific in Illinois. Again, that's Mohammed, Rand, and Aaron. And so we had our first event March 16th at Harvard College, and got out about 85 people. We're having this today. We call it the Supply Chain Managers Program, and we have many more today than we had March 16th, so I think we succeeded. We're then, one thing coming out of this, we're going to ask the supply chain people that attended here or that just came to the event but didn't come here to fill out a survey about what behavioral changes they want from these suppliers. Other than just cutting the price, we want lead, we want just in time, we want to answer the telephone, we want smaller batches at the same price, whatever it is that they want. And then we're going to take your responses to that and use that to train the suppliers about how to be more effective, more credible with your customers. So we're going to train both of you to speak total cost of ownership and then bring you together at the NCMA Contract Manufacturing Purchasing Fair, September 8th. Again, event something like this, except that in that case, the customers sit at the table and the job shops walk around. And for you to speed date, talk quickly, and then hopefully consummate and actually bring work back. And then IMEC and the other groups that are supporting us, there's about 40 of them locally here in Illinois, will go back to the big companies and say, okay, did you bring any work back? Why didn't we? Do we have to find you another supplier? If they say, well, then IMEC might say, well, either bring some work back or we're going to send Harry out to talk to you again. And they say, oh, no, we'll bring the work back, that's okay. And the anticipation is that either this year or whenever it is that we get it really right, that for $1,000 spent, we'll bring back a more or less permanent manufacturing job. And if you contrast that to what's typically done in Washington, the Obama stimulus program spent $250,000 to $500,000 and brought back a job for a year, and about 50% of them were government jobs. And if I had a choice of our alternative or that alternative, I think most people will take our alternative. It's 1,000 times more effective, and it's manufacturing jobs. So once we can prove that, then we anticipate that states and communities around the country will ask us to do the same thing for them. So I've worked locally with, I mentioned, McMurray Corp, circuit boards and telematics. I've trained 10 of their people in purchasing and selling. Hydroforce, done the same thing. I did Chicago Hardware about 2 weeks ago. Any of your companies that would like to have your supply chain people trained, your sales people trained, call me. I'd be happy to come out and help. So what I ask you to do is use the estimator, buy and sell thinking total cost of ownership, pass it on to other companies, call on me for help, participate in the Illinois initiative. You're doing it now, but continue with it. Send in cases of reshoring. How many of you have actually reshored anything at your own company? Okay? So ideally, take your card out, write cases on the back, hand me your card, I'll come back to you to get examples so I can put them in my presentation. I can have them put in articles. I can put them on the website so you get famous, your company gets credibility. We're going to have this survey that we talked about. This is how I perceive my effort. The national effort as opposed to just the Illinois effort where there's lots of help. This is a little Dutch boy. He's got his finger in the dike, preventing the offshoring from flooding Holland. And while he waits for the village elders to come in and repair the dike. And you're the village elders, and so by myself I can't fix the dike. You have to make that happen. Okay? So that's the PowerPoint. I'm going to very quickly take you through the ownership estimator. Okay, so here's what it looks like. Excuse me, moving away a little bit. So here's the U.S., here's China, you put data, here's that drop-down menu I'm so proud of. And you put that in, and output comes out. Over here in this column is explanation, and some of it's easy. What's the weight? It's the weight. It's in pounds. That's easy. But as you get
further down, intellectual property risk, so it gives data on the amount of intellectual property that happens. When you get to innovation, there's quotes like this is the one from the Professor Pisano and Steve Harvard, so that people can start to understand the process and make better decisions. So this is the input page, and then the output page looks like this. So you start out with the price again, and then based on the factors and the costs and the elements that you put in the other page, all these things come out. So there's the total of cost of goods sold and the total cumulative total of other hard factors, risks, and strategic. And then down here in green, there's nothing because I haven't yet found or incorporated good formulas to recognize that. And then at the end, there's the two graphs that I showed you in the PowerPoint. Okay? So that's the basis of it. So I'm open to questions. Questions from anybody? Yeah.
It's a real general question, but how often would you expect when a company goes through this exercise that the result shows favorably to bring the product back to the U.S.?
Okay, so how often do I think the results will favor bringing work back? Well, I don't know.
I mean, it's very general.
It's a if you're the survey that Archstone did said that people were underestimating the cost by 20–30%. So if you're underestimating your cost by 20 to 30%, you're almost surely making some wrong decisions. Okay. Now, with everything the way it is right now, my guess is that 15 to 20% of the work probably should be done. To do more, the shops have to become more competitive. To do more than that, the currencies have to change. But the currencies are changing and the wages are going up. So I'd say right now, today, 20%. 3 years from now, with no other actions by U.S. industry, 40%. And a good supply chain manager should be making the decisions today to get ready for 3 years from now. That's my best estimate.
All right, thank you.
Yes?
I guess just to piggyback off of this question, have any companies used this tool yet?
Have they? Yeah, I mentioned this McMurray Corp and Hydroforce. And
Okay.
There's probably a dozen out there that are using it.
Okay, and have they made the decision to bring manufacturing back?
No, I give them the tool. I am basically the Reshoring initiative nationally, so I speak about 3 times a week. So I don't have the time to go back to them and ask them, but that's one thing I have to do. In the future, in a future version of the estimator, we will have the estimator will be online, and then we'll ask companies to leave data on there, and we'll be able to email them back and forth. And so you build it out. What did you actually do with it? So we've got to automate that. Excellent question. Yeah.
Is anybody in the government interested in eliminating offshore components that are critical to DOD equipment?
Yeah, I know your question. I'm trying to work with NTIA, National Defense Industry Association, which works on that kind of thing, to get them to consider it. Most of the components that go into defense products are produced domestically, but far from all, and a lot of critical ones are not. I agree.
Critical. 3 years ago, I tripped over the issue in a attack that involved either the Abrams tank or the Bradley transmissions. They were failing. The components came out of China.
I agree it's unacceptable. I communicate with the Defense Department. I'm doing what I can. If you can help me, I'll appreciate it. How about, Matt, do you want to stop? But they're not going to change it. They want us to get back. So how about this? I think the show would like to get people back on the floor because the exhibitors have paid to be here. Everybody who's interested, the 5–10 people have their hands up. You come on up here and let's talk about it. Okay.
Wonderful, folks. Please give a big hand to Harry. This is something that he's doing from his heart. All his activities, all his input is all free. The total cost of ownership calculator is free. I'd like to bring in Rand Haas, who is the Executive Director of the Illinois Reshoring Initiative, to talk a little bit about what we are doing at the local level for this and how we would like you to be a partner with us in promoting this concept of bringing manufacturing and manufacturing jobs back home over here.
All right, well, let's first give Harry a big hand again. He's got a great... I realize the value of what he's talking about, and he is passionate about it. I hope you are passionate about it too. As Mohammed said, I'm Rand Haas. I'm the Executive Director of the Illinois Reshoring Initiative. We're the feet on the streets. We need to talk to you. That's why I was asking for your cards as you walked in. I want to get back to all of you as soon as possible. I know you got a lot of questions. We're going to start a website. You can go online right now. You can go to www.illinoisreshoring.org. A lot of this information is on there. As Harry gets more information, we'll bring more information to you. And most importantly, we need your information. We need to find out what is being done to reshore, how you're using the TCO estimator, because we need case studies. We have to build a solid case to go after the big guys, after the OEMs. So again, we need your help. We need contact. We've got a number of events coming up. We've got the event in July, the supplier training through IMEX support. We'll be providing that. We have an event in September, and then an event in the fall with the Department of Commerce called the National Manufacturing America Program. Again, thank you very much. I hope to talk to you soon.
One thing which I'd like to leave you guys with, and thank you for starting to applaud before you and I spoke, so I'm very happy about that. But Rand is also the president of the Medusa Consulting Group, which is a consulting group, and as part of this whole thing, I mean, we keep on hearing about rip-offs from overseas companies, and nobody seems to know what to do. I mean, if you look at the local company over here now, Fellows, which used to make shredding, shredders, they got totally ripped off by a company in China. What did they do? Who did they talk to? I mean, how did they let other people know that they're getting ripped off? So Medusa is putting together a new website, which will be operative in what, 2 months now?
No, about 3 months.
About 2 or 3 months. It's called as offshoreripoffs.org. So if a company has had a bad, thing with experience with any company, India, China, wherever, come on and blog about it. Let others know that they have had you and you're not going to stand up for it, so that we can level the playing field for you. Thank you very much again. Thanks for coming. And you can find the total cost of ownership calculator on illinoisreshoring.org. There's a link to it. And also at the national site that Harry has for that. Thank you.